listeners and readers of AwardsWatch.com. This is the Awards Watch Podcast, episode 175. It's a new year. No more other Oscars. We're done. We took a week off. We're back. I am your executive editor, Ryan McQuade, and joining me today is Sophia Ciminello.
Hi, everyone.
And Kevin Lee.
Hey, guys.
Man, we took a week off because we're exhausted. And I know other podcasts wanted to keep going, and it's like there was nothing to talk about, really, because of the fact that the Oscars were over. We were in the middle of South by still. It would have been kind of forcing it. I was exhausted. Kevin was exhausted. Dan was exhausted. I think everybody else that wasn't at South by was still exhausted from the Oscars. So
brains
took a week off.
Have been fried.
Exactly. But I think brains have been blown this weekend because one of the films that was on the South by Southwest lineup, the secret screening from Monday after the Oscars, was the Baba Yaga himself, John Wick Chapter 4, to be more specific. And it's in theaters now, and we're going to review that, and then we're going to do our top 5 action movie sequels of all time. So it's going to be a jam-packed, action-packed episode. Well, let's just jump right into it. Let's just talk about John Wick Chapter 4. There's no beating around the bush here. So John Wick Chapter 4, which is doing really well right now at the box office. It's going to make like $75 million, which I don't know. I don't know about you guys, but like, isn't it just kind of wild that the trajectory of this franchise and where it has gone from being like the butt of people's jokes 10 years ago and being a movie that like it made money, but it didn't make like a ton of money. And it really was a discovery. You had to really find this movie. And if you found it, it really did well, word of mouth and everything. And now we've had 3 sequels. Now this one's $100 million budget. It's going to make it back and then some. It's going to make a ton of money this weekend and next weekend. So like, Sophia, you are a newest addition to the John Wick universe. You are a newest member of the Continental. So I'm just curious, your experience kind of with this franchise so far and what you think about it overall before we start talking about Chapter 4.
Yeah, so with John Wick, for me, it really was, like you said, because it was sort of the butt of the joke. I never really prioritized seeing these movies. I like a good number of action movies, but it's not the genre that I seek out first. I really have to, hear good word of mouth or see really positive reviews. And sometimes I have to be, pushed to watch them by a trusted friend or colleague. In this case, Ryan, you told me to watch these movies.
Damn right I did.
I love Keanu also. So it was sort of strange that I had never visited them, but I watched them this year and I love them. I think it's a great franchise. And one of the big things I think thinking about Chapter 4 and what you mentioned with the budget and with the box office and just the overall trajectory of the series is that I really think Chad Stahelski has not cut corners. Like, he's really committed to making everything look really sharp, to having excellent blocking and choreography, to having these incredible set pieces where I feel like the franchise, every single movie I like and think is really strong. And this one didn't let me down at all. I thought it was a perfect sequel, really, an entry into the franchise. So yeah, John Wick, I highly recommend if there's anyone out there who hasn't seen any of the films, or, maybe you've just seen the first one and have been dragging your feet on the sequels, definitely check them out. They will not let you down. The influences, which we'll talk about too, are also so strong. I think that Stahelski definitely wears the influences on his sleeve, which is something I really like, and how he combines violence and comedy works so well for me. And I feel like it's sort of the perfect series for all of Keanu's skill sets and the skills of just incredible supporting actors and characters.
Kevin, when did you see the first one in theaters? Did you watch it at home like myself?
I saw them at home.
Okay, so you've seen them all except the new one.
Correct.
And wow, okay, all right.
Yep.
So When you saw the first one, when you discovered it, Kevin, what did you think of that?
I was really taken aback by how an action movie that was that simple and that low budget, how much the movie's sense of mythology and world building actually like hooked me in.
Mm-hmm.
It was to me, it was one of those. To me, it's one of those movies that I would often point to when it comes to like how do you nail world building, because I think there's more than just establishing rules and establishing logic in your movie. You also need to have your world to be so in line with your tone and the story, so that the stakes of your story actually make sense with the world that you've created. And I think the first John Wick is so brilliant because it managed to pull that off, even though the plot of the movie is just someone pissed him off and he wants revenge, and that's it. You know,
and why do they want revenge? Why does he want revenge, Kevin?
Oh, because someone was dumb enough to kill his dog.
Yep. Yeah. Very stupid.
Dogs are really important in this franchise. We love the puppies.
But the thing is, like, you were saying, Ryan, with chapter 4 going to make like $75 million. That is almost the lifetime gross of the first John Wick.
Yep.
So we've come a long, long way. And what's so cool is that after the first John Wick, we get 3 sequels, and each one manages to expand its universe just a little bit more. And it continues the storyline just a little bit more. There isn't that much of a significant time jump. It really feels like we're picking up right where we left off, and we're following John Wick. There are new characters introduced. There's a little bit of new mythology, and it never feels like certain other franchises where it could fall into the trap of making itself up as it goes. To me, it doesn't fall into that trapping. And for me, chapter 4 just it elevates like everything that I've already loved about the previous 3 films. It manages to be so brutal in its violence, yet so funny. And I think that's so hard to get right. If you can make me groan over a kill, like a fatality kill, and then laugh the next second, you did something like magical, and I think a lot of that credit goes to Chad's direction. A lot of that goes to Keanu's just in his insane dedication to doing all of these stunts. And frankly, just everyone in the cast, everyone is in the mood to play, that's what makes these movies work.
So these movies, Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves, they've known each other for a long, long time, because Chad Stahelski was Keanu Reeves' stunt double on the Matrix films.
Right.
So that's where this sort of partnership begins. And it has that DNA of the Matrix. It's that a lot of practical effects, a lot of kung fu, gun fu, influences from John Woo and so many other, and Bruce Lee and so many other action films and auteurs that have dominated the genre for years. But what's so great about this one is when I first saw the film, I was like house sitting, and it was on HBO, and I was like, I've heard good things. It's got like, and you know how like when you on the TV, it has like the Rotten Tomato score and everything. So you're like, screw it. I'll watch a dumb action movie with Keanu Reeves tonight. It was so good. I saw my wife the next night, and I said, we're not going to the movies tonight. We're going to stay at home and we're going to watch this movie. And because I needed confirmation of this is good, right? I'm not just an idiot in thinking like this is dumb fun. Like this is really, really good. And she was like, no, this is really good. And so ever since, I've seen him in the theater. And when I saw chapter 2, it was with a packed audience. And then when I saw chapter 3, it was with a more like a Sunday afternoon sort of audience. But chapter 4 was probably one of the most insane experiences, because Kevin and I were in the room for the world US premiere of because it premiered overseas first, but it was the US premiere, American premiere of John Wick chapter 4. Stahelski and Keanu were there to introduce the film, and like sat like a couple of rows from where we were at. And What's so great about it is it's exactly the kind of movie that I love, in that the action is just dialed up to 11. The lore is dialed up to 11. These performances are so committed. You have any movie that has Lawrence Fishburne in it at this point is like a win. And the fact that like Lawrence Fishburne's just going over the top in this performance, it's just great. Like he's just this underground sort of like, you know, the Bowery King, you know what I mean? And he's great. Ian McShane's great. I mean, obviously Sarsgaard is really good as like our foil here, but like, you know, Keanu's committed performance is a lot of what I love about another franchise that I think is, because I think John Wick is one of the two best franchises we have currently in Hollywood because of their dedication and commitment. I think it's this and Mission Impossible are the two franchises that when I sit there and I watch them, I know that they give a shit about me as the viewer of this movie. So therefore, I am not going to waste a minute. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to come up with new ways to awe you rather than like a Fast and Furious movie now, which is just like, I'm just going to throw everything at the screen and see what sticks. I think there is a little bit of that here with a 2 hour and 49-minute runtime, but this movie moves. They move. Like Fallout 2 is another example of like a movie that just moves. You never feel like you're looking at your watch. It doesn't feel like you've wasted time like Marvel films at a certain point, or the gears are sort of turning. You feel as if like these people are only going to make these movies if they themselves are invested in the story. And that is really a lot of like the mentality that the three of us and a lot of people that are of our age grew up with a lot of our studio blockbusters. And nowadays it's all about spitting them out and getting profit. And they've always been about that for sure. But there was a level of dedication and filmmaking behind it. Like when the Wachowskis did the Matrix films, or when Gore Verbinski does his Pirates movies, or when these certain directors do these giant epics, they had a purpose behind it. They had a vision, blocking, storytelling, the crafts, everything. All of it is elevated because it has a singular vision and it has dedicated performers behind it too. These movies are the perfect example, along with Mission Impossible, as to why the stunt category should exist at all voting bodies, including the Academy. It shouldn't just be a SAG ensemble sort of thing. But like, what's better than like sitting in a theater with a bunch of random strangers watching John Wick, spoiler alert a little bit, just like fall down a flight of stairs like he's Jason Derulo. And and the whole there's every time he fell at our screening and Kevin was there, this lady and a bunch of other people would start screaming, "Get up, Keanu!" And it would just a thunderous roar of applause every time he did get up. And it was infectious. They are the best premieres on the planet. Like South by Southwest are the best. I'm sorry to every other place, but they cater to the movie fan inside of us. Not you can watch a studio comedy, and you can watch a drama and about a shoe, and you can watch a John Wick movie with that same audience, and it all gets electrified. And it's kind of it was the perfect John Wick experience. It was the perfect experience for this movie. But this movie is insane, and there's a lot to talk about. So let's kind of dive right into it. I mean, John Wick Chapter 4, it's essentially his descent into trying to once again clear his name off the high table. But before that, he's got to face off against a new enemy with powerful alliances across the globe, and forces himself to turn old friends into foes and foes into old friends and all this other, nonsense. But it's a 2 hour and 50-minute movie. And it's got a lot going for it. So, Sophia, just your thoughts on the grand scope of this darn thing. Because this is the first one you saw in a theater, too. So how was your theater experience with it?
My theater experience was so much fun. We had an electric crowd. I went on a Friday night, like last night, to see it, and people were so invested and audibly reacting to a lot of the action, which was so much fun. There's a dog in the movie that belongs to a character named like Tracker, Mr. Nobody. And anytime the dog would attack or was maybe a little bit in danger, people were nervous. Like the people were very invested in the outcome around this dog. But yeah, it was a great crowd. People were cheering, clapping, and it didn't feel like what happens sometimes when you go to a Marvel movie and there's a cameo and everyone starts cheering. It didn't feel like that. It felt like genuine earned emotion. And that was something I really loved about the experience. And yeah, this is a movie that you have to see in a theater. I think not just because of that experience watching it with a crowd, but because of the tech elements at work. Dan Louston, the DP, who also shot The Shape of Water and Nightmare Alley, he makes everything look so crisp and clear. And I loved the colors and that sort of, it has elements of like Tokyo cinema, Hong Kong cinema, noir. It's sort of a different take on the crime thriller film, but it also had it, like I said earlier, wears its influences on its sleeve. The sound work I thought was phenomenal, and just seeing how all of these set pieces around the world are so smartly used to show the action. That was what I really loved. Like having the roundabout around the Arc de Triomphe and having the traffic there, and the cars just seem to speed up as the scene goes along, and that infamous staircase at Le Sacré-Cœur, if you go there, having those elements of the setting factor in so well to the action was really important for me as a viewer. And yes, it's a long movie, but I never really felt the length because there was just never a dull moment. It did take time to breathe at key moments, and I thought that was really important. But yeah, the way that it moves from Osaka Continental to the Berlin nightclub to Paris, and you go through all of those different set pieces, I thought that was just top tier action filmmaking.
The thing is, like, most action movies, like if you were to ask me, like, what are some action movies where the sense of place feels so crucial and immersive? I think of the James Bond movies. I think of Mission Impossible movies. I think of Indiana Jones movies.
I think of Bourne
movies too. And it's like really, really cool in a way how, I don't know, this might just be me personally, how sort of under the radar the John Wick movies have been, because it's like 4 movies of these staggeringly beautiful landscapes. And you said it, Sophia, like it's so well shot. The way it plays with sense of color and lighting, and it just feels so refreshing to see an action movie that knows how to use long, wide shots to not cut up the action. So you can really see the hard work and dedication this team of incredible professional people. They're like pouring all of their like energy and passion into this, and you see it on screen. And that's what makes us, the audience, so heavily invested, you know. But I think the other thing that makes the John Wick sequels so great is each one just brings in new actors and new characters that just surprise, you know. Like when I think of Chapter 2, I think of Common and Lawrence Fishburne being introduced. When I think of Chapter 3, like I think of like the whole finale with the I think it's the samurai crew, the whole finale at the hotel.
I think of Halle Berry with the dogs.
And but for Chapter 4, I think what they did here with Donnie Yen and Hiroyuki Sanada and Rina Sawayama and Scott Adkins, holy shit.
Yeah, they just said, we're gonna throw the kitchen sink, and the kitchen sink, it all sticks. That's what's so great about it.
Yeah,
the thing is, there's I don't want to give too much away, but there is a moment in the film. It's a moment between Donnie Yen and Hiroyuki Sanada.
Oh man,
where I felt like, this is where I really like these supporting characters a little bit more than the supporting characters from the other sequels. Why? Because they're interacting with each other as opposed to they only interact with John Wick.
That's fair.
You know, and when you get to that moment, it's like, I know we're probably only in the first half of this movie. We're not even halfway. We're probably only at the end of the first act or something.
Yeah, we were only at like 30 minutes in.
Right, but I don't care where this movie is going to take me. You know, but at that point, it's like, I'm sold. I'm just do whatever, just do whatever you want, movie.
Yeah.
I mean, like I mean, there were sequences in this film. I mean, you both mentioned two already, but I think Kevin specifically is absolutely right. The idea of action films nowadays, and I think a lot of this is the fault of like Paul Greengrass, without it being intentional. It's the shaky cam, in your face, up close, personal. We're not really going to show if we actually did a good job with this choreography or not. It's just enough quick cuts and edits to be able to see, to manipulate the audience to think that there's something cool going on.
Right. Like you only know, the only reason why you know someone punched someone else is because you heard the punch sound effect.
Yeah, you heard the sound. You didn't actually
It's the Netflix action movie problem.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. They've adapted that style and sort of taking it to the extreme. John Wick, on the other hand, because of the fact that Stahelski and Keanu Reeves have taken it to, have upped the ante every time. It feels like the camera at each film has gone back and back and back. And so and what's so great about it too, is that with each film, you can feel the energy within John Wick himself sort of dissipate, and he's not doing it quick. He's doing it at a deliberate, it's like his pace. It's like, this is a sports analogy, sorry, but like when you play against a team and they've got their own pace and style, and they say they're playing at their own pace. That's how they're dominating this game. Is that they're slowing the ball down. They're setting up the offense. They're playing at an easy tempo. That's what John Wick is in this movie. Because with we've seen nunchucks in a movie plenty of times.
But not like this.
Not like this. This is like a guy that I'm not going to flash and do all the flash and panache for you. I'm just going to beat the shit out of you. And I'm going to kill you with these things. That's the goal. And then the aerial shot, which looks like a freaking game of Clue, going from great. One room to the next with this exploding shotgun.
It's like an incendiary shotgun.
The incendiary shotgun. And him just and you know what? Some movies you could feel okay, maybe you can only use that once. This is fire 100 rounds of this thing off. I don't give a shit. You know what I mean?
Go
it's
right ahead.
Burn the fucker to the ground, essentially, is the mentality of this movie. And I love that because of the fact that they found something cool. And it's the different ways and it's the different angles, not just from above, but from below, of how they shoot this idea. And it's how they can get creative with this one thing, which is an exploding bullet. How can we tap enough without this getting repetitive? And then we've seen chase scenes. We've seen him get chased, in the last one, he got chased around New York, and he got chased in after by Common and everybody in the second film, and he gets kind of chased a little bit in the first one. This is taking the chase scene to the next level, and the only comparison is because the last time we saw this sort of chase scene location is in Mission Impossible Fallout be used, and it's almost like these two films, they're not competing with each other, but they're using essentially the same locations, but doing it differently. Like Mission Impossible, shot in the day, nothing happens at that location whatsoever. It's just a nice, shot of him on the of Cruise on the motorcycle going this way. This is done at night against traffic, almost like the most nightmarish game of Frogger you're ever going to play in your life. And it's so goddamn good. And there's a race against the clock to go and do this duel. And what's so interesting is like, okay, I'm not coming to a John Wick movie for the most eloquent dialogue on the planet. Okay. And I know that like some criticisms about this franchise and particularly this movie and its runtime is about the dialogue. But for me, I just don't give a shit about the dialogue because the action set pieces are so good. The stuff in the middle where they're trying to explain Alexander Skarsgård's character and trying to set up these other side characters and everything, and Ian McShane's plan to try to get the New York Continental back and all this different stuff. Like, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what they need to do. Why do I care? Why do I have to sit through a bunch of other movies and hear about the fucking quantum realm for 7,000 years? And what it feels like when you watch an Ant-Man movie. But this movie sit here and it clearly has rules and it established itself. It comes up with maybe new rules every now and then to expand its lore and does it in such an interesting way. I mean, like the operators, like I've always loved the operator system, like in this, and then taking this to like a radio DJ sort of extent so cool. Here. It's like,
that was great.
These are like little things that you just add. And if you can appreciate, and I think that it's a
There's
problem.
So much class,
Yeah, this is the problem I think with modern blockbuster and modern audiences is like a little bit of exposition is fine. This is not Inception where it's like the whole script. You know what I mean? It's like 20 minutes in the movie. You know what I mean? And that's okay. Like we can have a second to breathe in this movie. Like Sophia, like you were saying, like this movie gets a chance to breathe and really get to explore the emotions of the impact that happened at the end of the last chapter. And also we have some pretty sad things happen here. We lose, not just in real life, but in the film, there is a loss of Lance Reddick's character, and it affects both McShane and Reeves in a way where they set aside a lot. There's a lot of unspoken, things that are set aside. And so that they can both be free of this nagging problem that's been facing them for the past week.
I've always felt like the thing that really, really held the John Wick movies together has always been the unspoken friendship between Keanu Reeves and Ian McShane.
Man,
like I think about the ending of chapter 2, where he becomes excommunicado, but Ian McShane's Winston is like kind and generous enough to give him a head start.
Give him like an hour or 30 minutes.
He gives him an hour. And because he does that, he gets in trouble in the third movie. He pays for it, and you said it in chapter 4. In this one, there are times where certain characters talk about, you know what? Friendship is more important. It is more important than living in fear of the high table. And you have these characters who acknowledge that, some commit to that philosophy, others don't, and that makes really great conflict. It makes good character conflict, so by the time the actual fighting starts, we're invested enough to actually, and because the choreography is so like well thought out and actually brutal, people get hurt. And so when people get hurt, we're actually like, oh shit, like people can die. These characters that we're spending time with, at any point they could die. I think that's really, really well thought out. So it's not just enjoyable and fun. There's real stakes here. There's real danger here.
I think that's a big difference for me, and why I really like these movies is because you can feel the stakes and you can feel like the premise itself is very clear, and where the characters stand can feel very simplistic and clear on the surface. But underneath that, there's so much depth and surprise there that you really don't know where the film is going and where it can end up. And I think that one of the strengths of the franchise is actually something you said, Ryan, that people are complaining about, which is the dialogue. Like I think that having limited I don't
have those problems. I'm just,
I know. But I think having limited exposition, but really a really strong, grounded mythology, Kevin, like you mentioned, that is a strength of this series. Absolutely, and I liked that Keanu didn't have a lot of dialogue. I didn't think we needed it. I thought I was perfectly fine moving through the action and knowing that was the core of the story. And then that's where a lot of the emotion comes through. Like, I don't really care if you give Kane a monologue. I want to see him fighting in that kitchen, putting those those motion sensors around with the doorbells going off. Like, that was
so good.
That was such an incredible scene. Like, I don't need a ton of dialogue from the Scott Adkins character with John Wick. Like, I just want to see them fight in this Berlin nightclub. Like, that's all I really want from these movies. So sure, you can nitpick, I think, and, you know, find flaws in dialogue, but I don't know. I think a lot of the dialogue plays for laughs too. You have to think this is a movie that centers its action and its violence, but also plays up the comedy whenever it can.
It's campy.
I love that.
Yeah. You cannot tell me that when Keanu Reeves walks up to Lawrence Fishburne and says, "I'm going to need a gun," that you won't laugh at that. Right. I mean,
like there's no way in the second film when he's like, you know, basically like, are you gonna keep talking or are you just gonna give me a gun? And Lawrence Fishburne goes, "Can somebody please get this man a gun?" You know what I mean? Like, come on.
Right,
no one's sitting there going, "Oh, Oscar clip." You know what I mean? Like,
or like the ending of chapter 3 when Lawrence Fishburne's like, "Are you pissed off, John?" And Keanu's like, "Yeah."
I mean,
there's one part in this one too, I can't remember the character who says it, but calls him Jonathan Wick. And it's just, that's so, like, it's just
it's good. McShane only calls him Jonathan.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
It's just like, it's perfect. And I think too, even the moments that show the honestly incredible cinematic influences are funny. Like when Lawrence Fishburne does the Lawrence of Arabia match cut, I screamed.
Oh my God.
I was like, they did this?
You have no idea how much like Kevin and Dan were around me. And when I saw that, my mouth hit the fucking floor. I was like, oh my God, they did not just do that in a John Wick movie.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Ryan's grin from where I was sitting.
Oh my God.
It was like
so good.
Oh no.
Speaking
of what we're doing here.
Speaking of line delivery, Donnie Yen has a moment in this movie where he says "fuck off" and it's priceless.
Oh, he's Kevin, you mentioned it. He's so good. He is so good
in this, and he wears sunglasses throughout the entire movie because he plays this blind assassin, and so you never actually see his eyes throughout the film, and yet there's something about the way he was directed. It's the performance he gives. There's the physicality to it when he's not fighting. That there you can see, like, you can feel the regret coming from how he walks. Mm-hmm. how he talks, or how he takes his pauses before he says his lines, talking about how he will still end up serving the high table. He will be of service. You can feel that drama that his character Kane is going through. And then when Donnie Yen encounters Keanu Reeves for the first time and they fight one another, they recognize one another. They're old friends, and you can see, like, before they even start fighting, that you see it in their physicality, that there is regret. I'm sorry it has to be this way. I'm sorry the circumstances have forced us to be in this situation. And then you get this amazing action, which, by the way, like, I know probably everybody out there loves watching Donnie Yen action choreography, but whoever choreographed his fight scenes in this movie with his cane, and just the way he uses his cane to still tap around the furniture and his surroundings to make sure he knows where he's at currently, and it's so brilliant. It's so brilliant. He sold a blind assassin just 100%.
Yeah, he was my MVP of the movie. Anytime he was on screen, I was fully locked in to this character and his performance. I thought he was phenomenal. Probably him and Rina Sawayama as well. I thought she was fantastic. Her costume when she's fighting, and there's a moment when she's on a character's back going up the stairs, stabbing him multiple times. Oh my God. Play it on a loop.
I am. I just really am also. I think that the unsung two little performance in this movie that not a lot of people are really talking about because of all these great action people and everybody in this film, and obviously Keanu's committed performance and everybody that has been in the franchise too, kind of coming back as well. I don't think that like we really talk about or people have talked enough about Alexander Skarsgård's performance here.
Bill Skarsgård.
Bill Skarsgård, sorry. They all look the same. They're all they all could afford to be out in the sun a little bit. Yeah, you know what I mean? But Bill Skarsgård, Pennywise himself. See, I knew that at least. I think he's great here. I think he like we haven't really had like, I mean, they've had the sort of centralized villain in the first three films, but like this seems like my favorite kind of villain, which is just super petty. Like he is super petty about Wick and super petty about like the rules, and this idea too of that he represents the new order and sort of chaos that this franchise could have if they don't have the rule structure. The idea of that they're, fighting on continental grounds, or the idea of essentially putting out a hit for a person that's already excommunicated, for somebody that like has become a nuisance for themselves, and that they are essentially put in this position from the high table standpoint to eliminate John Wick. And yet even the high table representatives play like Clancy Brown, who's just amazing, just got that voice, my god, it's telling him like, you're doing too much, like it's just John Wick, like calm down, like. And so I love the fact that he essentially by the end is the most pettiest bitch on the planet, and he is just sending hundreds of assassins at this point to set up this giant set piece. And he's playing essentially like chess on the board. He's got the music playing. He's upping the ante. He's got Donnie Yen chasing him that he's hired. He's got all these assassins chasing him. He's got Mr. No Name, right? Also chasing after him and paying for him to go and try to kill him. He is doing whatever means necessary. And it just also then proves how unstoppable a force that John is. And I think it's great. But the other thing that really makes this franchise so well is, and done so well, is the emotional component that goes with a movie like this. We've been with this guy for 10 years, 4 films now. It should get really old, the idea that like Bridget Monahan and his wife dying and the peace that he should have, because like at this point, any other franchise would forget about that and just be like, I'm going to kill everybody and be the last man standing. And he is doing that, but really he's still trying to just be the guy to find a way out so he can live a peaceful, quiet, lonely life. And that's what's so great about Keanu's performances in these movies, is that at the core of it, it is about somebody fighting to be alone, even though they have all these people that prove through his connections and everything that he doesn't have to be alone in this fight. But ultimately, the fight is so that he can grieve and live a peaceful life away from this gigantically complicated world. And I love that. It's it's a little bit also too of like why I love the Mission Impossible films, is because like there's a purpose behind Ethan Hunt, and there is a purpose behind John Wick. They're totally different, in my opinion, from what their end goal is supposed to be as characters and as people who are driving the actions and decisions that they're doing. But it's what makes John Wick so great, is that there's more than just the violence here that makes all the decisions in the film then sing when you're watching them. It's like, yes, I'm watching all these guys literally get shot in the face. Okay. But there's a purpose behind all of it. And that's what makes for great storytelling. So, yeah. And the movie's like 3 hours long, and it earns every moment of it because of the fact that when you the time you get to the end, you're emotionally invested in this character.
Right.
And I'm just so sick and tired. I talked to Sophia about that this week, and Kevin a little bit too last week. The arguments for like 3-hour long movies, I don't care. If they are 9 hours long, I don't care. It is about intention and whether or not I buy in to all these things happening. And if I buy into the story as a whole. And if there are some moments that, maybe could get cut or whatnot, like this movie was supposed to be like 3 hours and 45 minutes or something like that. That was what the original cut was.
I think even longer than that.
Or it's like 4 hours, like in 45 minutes or something. And they like cut it down, which is like, they still had a lot they could have thrown in here.
Yeah.
And that's great that they cut it to 2:45. And I think they just made a sleek, well-oiled machine. And for all those people out there that have seen this, there's no doubt in my mind, we will be talking about a John Wick 5 in a couple of years.
I think
this movie is making too much money, and it's still at the height. And I don't see the ending of this movie 100% sticking, but then it's also that thing of, certain things happen off screen. You don't, and it's the old, if you haven't seen it, did it actually exist?
I would say what everything that you just said, Ryan, I completely agree. And that goes back to the thing that we were talking about earlier. This is why I do enjoy the moments of dialogue, because you talk about how the heart of these movies is about this man who just wants to be left alone to grieve. And I don't want to give the details away, but there are exchanges between Keanu Reeves and Ian McShane, specifically one where they're on a boat together. And there are things that they say to one another that, like, whoa, like I haven't felt this since the original. But it actually feels earned. It feels like a culmination of this entire ordeal and struggle that John Wick has gone through. And it made me think back to scenes from previous films. I think about how in the original John Wick, when he decided, because remember when we meet John Wick in the beginning of the first film, he's retired, like he's living a normal life. And there comes a point where he goes into his his garage and he takes like a sledgehammer and he unlocks this this case underneath the ground, right? But then it makes me think about how chapter 2 starts, where he actually went and buried all of that back. And he actually felt like, now leave me alone in peace. Or I think about how after Act 1, where his home gets destroyed, that at the end of that movie in chapter 2, he goes back to his home still. Like after it's all been burnt down and destroyed, he still goes back to his home. Like I think about those moments. And I think when you have these more slower moments of dialogue here in chapter 4, it just makes me feel so good that this team behind these films, not only do they manage to up the ante on the stunts and the action choreography, that you're right, Ryan, that they never lose sight of the story and the emotional core. And brilliant work, honestly.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've talked a lot about John Wick. Does anybody have any final thoughts before we get into our top 5 for this week? Anybody? Sophia?
Yeah, my big final thought I would say is I love the Buster Keaton influences in this series. 2 and 3, they were very clear in how they were put forth. But I think, in chapter 4, we still, it still feels like a Buster Keaton movie just in 2023.
I mean, those stairs alone.
The stairs. There's so many good moments of characters rolling and tumbling and falling down those stairs that I could watch over and over again. I absolutely love them. So yeah, I think again, just the way that it uses its influences, really smart, very purposeful, and ultimately incredibly funny.
I tweeted a video a while back. It's a moment from chapter 3, and it's a moment that involves John Wick getting thrown into a lot of glass. So there's a lot of glass shattering.
Yeah.
And before I saw chapter 4, I've always felt that moment involving all the glass shattering is probably the funniest moment out of all 3 movies. And it really, really shocked me that chapter 4 manages to rival that with the stairs sequence. And in addition to that, I love the tradition of these movies and always finding a way to have John Wick get hit by a truck or get hit by a car. Yeah. It's always after he kills someone and then he gets a moment to breathe and he turns and bam, he gets just whacked by one and he gets right back up. And it's funny. Yeah. It's funny every time.
I think that I think half the budget for John Wick Chapter 4 is for on-set chiropractors. Because I think that Keanu's back has got to be just shattered. I mean, like good Lord, the amount of things, but also too, Sophia, in that moment, there's obviously in the staircase scene, there's a lot of Buster Keaton, but then it's also like, it also just reminds me too of like Westerns.
Oh yeah.
Well, it's like a lot of it is like the look at the stairs and like this is the last and like the stairs are the enemy. Like the stairs are like the duel, the showdown. You know what I mean?
The way that final duel is shot is so classic Western. I love that camera there.
Leone and the way that they look at one another, and so satisfying too. Oh my God, when that duel ends, when we were in the theater, it was like somebody won the Super Bowl. It was like insane. It was and honestly, I was giddy. I mean, I don't get giddy a lot in movies, but Kevin can tell you, I was just like eating this movie up. It's hard not to love these movies. It's
so giddy, and the punchlines are in line with what the other films have been doing too. So it's like it doesn't feel like it's completely out of left field. It just feels like we have been building to this moment this entire time. It's great. Fantastic stuff.
Absolutely. And like I said, I hope we see another one. It's all kind of contingent upon Keanu and Chad. I know that they're trying to do like a spin-off series with Ana de Armas, and it looks like they also set up more of his family lineage in this movie too, which we didn't really talk about, which is really interesting stuff as well. And the idea of like there being like families and factions, you know, more. Right. I mean, like the idea of like you're mentioning, Sophia, the Tokyo Continental, and then there obviously being essentially one in Paris, and
I love it every time they show a different Continental.
When they really do, I mean, like it's oh my God, like the fact that like they just kind of slide it in. It's so casual.
I know
the way that they slide in all this stuff, and then you start thinking about it, and you start breaking it all down. You're like, oh my God, they have built more of a world here than Marvel has in like 30 films. Like it's
really
insane.
Smart.
That's the thing. It's like with other franchises, when they introduce new characters or introduce new places, oftentimes other franchises, it feels like they're making it up as they go. Here, it feels like it's always been there.
Yeah,
you know,
it's lived in.
And this is a really, really weird analogy that I'm about to make, but I feel like the way the John Wick movies introduce new characters and they're instantly iconic and they feel like they've always been there, they remind me of how the Toy Story movies introduce new characters. It's like they're instantly iconic and they're automatically fit into their world. You know, I don't know, weird parallel, but I'm gonna go with it.
Well, and Keanu is Duke Kaboom.
Yeah, too, that's right.
So, which is also just like one of the best,
instantly iconic.
Yeah, instantly iconic characters.
Yes, we Canada.
Yes. Okay. So that's John Wick Chapter 4. We didn't spoil a lot. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it a lot throughout the year. It's one of the best action films that we've seen in quite some time. Probably better than maybe any action film I saw last year. Yeah, that's tough. That would be
tough. Ooh,
definitely
that's really tough.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. All right, so we're going to do best action movie sequels. Sophia is a connoisseur of the action movie franchise, as she said earlier. So, Sophia, any criteria that you had for this list? Anything you omitted or wanted to keep in a penalty box? And if not, what's your number 5?
Here's the thing about me with action movies is that while my knowledge isn't deep like deep in the genre. I don't watch a lot of bad action movies. I do watch a lot of really good action movies.
Yeah.
So this list wasn't too hard for me to make. I would say honorable mentions before I get to number 5 that I just wanted to throw out there. Kill Bill Volume 2, I did not include because I consider the Kill Bill Volume 1 and 2 as one film.
That is correct. That's correct.
That is not correct because I paid twice to see it in theaters.
Well, that's your fault. You paid for it twice. I paid for it once. There you go.
Yeah. So if I could include Kill Bill as an entire film, it would be like maybe my number 1 or number 2, but it's not here.
Wow.
Also, Goldfinger, which is my favorite James Bond movie.
Yeah.
I didn't really know what to
this
do
is
with
correct
the
too.
Bonds. I didn't really know what to do with them because they're not like technically sequels in most cases. Like it's a series where they don't necessarily operate as sequels in the traditional sense that I'm going to think about in my top 5.
Yeah.
So my number 5, without considering those, is Spider-Man 2. So I love this movie. It is one of my favorite comic book movies. Sam Raimi's follow-up to Spider-Man, which is very good. But I think that Spider-Man 2 is a perfectly constructed sequel that improves upon the original in every way. The story between Peter and MJ is so strong and so emotional. Like thinking about the emotional core of the Wick movies, like taking that here and thinking about like Peter and his struggles as a real person, like that is all like the duality between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Like that's important to the story, but the action is incredible. Like the horror elements that Raimi brings to the hospital scene with Doc Ock, like that terrified me when I first watched it. And I still think it's just impeccable action filmmaking. And the scene with Peter and the train, like that is just wonderful. And the way that that's shot and choreographed. And again, it all just comes back to the emotion in the film and the characters. So I chose Spider-Man 2 as my number 5.
Yeah, one of the best comic book movies of all time. And it's also great action. And also too, just because Sam Raimi has just that singular vision too behind the camera. That's what makes it so unique. Yeah. Kevin, any criteria you had or anything you omitted? And then what was your number 5, buddy?
Yeah, some of the criteria I applied, I ignored things that could technically qualify as reboots. So for example, I omitted Mad Max Fury Road because you could argue that's sort of like a reboot. And there's also sort of like a genre line that I don't quite know how to go about doing this, so it probably doesn't make much sense. But there's probably some movies on here that are like action / sci-fi or action / fantasy. Maybe some of them are more fantasy than action. So there's some sort of logic in my head that just makes me omit them. So for me personally, when we're talking just action movies, I've omitted the Lord of the Rings movies. Because even though there is a lot of action in them, I feel like they're more fantasy movies than action movies. That's just sort of the logic I have in my head. So when Sophia gave her number 5 choice, I gasped because my number 5 is also Spider-Man 2.
Oh my God.
There you go.
I love it.
And the reason why, in addition to everything Sophia said, and Ryan, what you said, I think Spider-Man 2 is a movie that has just gotten better and better over time. Like the more Marvel movies that have been coming out and me watching them, the more I'm really, really feeling that emotional core and storyline behind Peter Parker and how his entire struggle in that movie is juggling his job and paying rent and not failing school and not disappointing MJ and all those things. He can't quite get a hang of it. Like he can't ever be in control. He's always like falling behind. He can't catch a break to the point where he gives up in that movie. He gives up. He doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore. And we feel for him. But by the end, when he finally like accepts that role again, that he is Spider-Man again, that there's such a deep emotional resonance to that train fight. You're rooting for him 100% because he's back. He knows who he is now. And I think the other beautiful thing about Spider-Man 2 is that I think Sam Raimi, as a director, he understands that in superhero movies, it's way more than just that hero with the superpowers. Like he finds the hero in everyday folk. Like after the end of that train fight, like I think about Doc Ock coming back and wanting to take Spider-Man for himself, and all the passengers on that train are like, you got to go through me. You got to go through me. And I think I think at the core of it, even though our protagonist is someone who shoots web and slings across, you know, from building to building, I think the real hero in that film is Peter Parker. Like for him to like have his shit together and still figure it out, you know, and get by, you know, and hold on to these relationships. And I think that's the hardest part. And Sam Raimi recognizes that, like, that's the hero in every single one of us. And even though I do really like the first Spider-Man, I think Spider-Man 2 really, really nails that idea to the point where when I listen to Danny Elfman's theme for Spider-Man, like if I listen to it long enough, it makes me cry. Yeah. You know, and not that many superhero themes can do that, you know. And so yeah, my number 5 is Spider-Man 2.
I really need to rewatch that movie. It's been a while since I've seen it. But I also the thing that also I appreciate about that film in particular is Raimi's ability and the screenplay's ability to look at Peter Parker and show a flawed hero and show the fact that this is somebody that is struggling with their identity, even to the point where it's almost like having, you know, to find themselves again in their purpose once more. And it's almost like even tapping into like mental health a little bit more and examining that through Peter, because of the fact that his powers are falling away from him, because it's about like, what does my heart want most? Do I want to be Spider-Man? Do I want to be potentially the perfect boyfriend or the perfect student or the perfect, you know, worker or whatever? And so I love all that. And then, yeah, I mean, like Kevin and I have talked about this before, but horror directors, I think, are some of the best at making action set pieces, because like Raimi, the Doc Ock hospital or the removal of the claws scene is so terrifying. And yet and for audiences now, they probably be like scared shitless, but it's like, it's such a great scene of building up the tension of your villain, and you really don't even see his face for most of that. You just see the claws, and it's very Evil Dead, you know, without being gory and violent. So yeah, I like that pick a lot. I just haven't seen it in a long time, but I do like both of those Spider-Man movies. I think like the first one and the second one are really good, and then we don't need to talk about the third one. But
they still remain, in my opinion, the best Spider-Man movies.
I agree.
1 and 2.
Totally.
They're better than Spider-Verse.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Into the Spider-Verse?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that. My criteria, Sophia is right. Kill Bill's one movie, didn't put him on there. Lord of the Rings is one movie, didn't put him on there. And also it was really tough to pick like Lord of the Rings movies too. And plus I've talked a lot about Lord of the Rings in the past. Kevin's also right. I just penalty box Mad Max Fury Road. Just thought that would be a movie that I'm like, you know what? I love this movie. I don't need to talk about it nearly as much. It would probably be number 1 on this list. If I was trying to just wanting to talk about some other films or more recent films that I've seen that I think deserve some of my time. And then also I penalty box The Dark Knight. I don't think of The Dark Knight as an action movie. I think of that more as like a crime film. And I think of that more as like the action is secondary. It's also like Nolan's not particularly known for great action. He's known for a couple of good set pieces in his film, but like his action and everything is kind of secondary to those characters, is what I think of more with a Christopher Nolan film. So I saw that on a lot of lists, like The Dark Knight. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure.
Well, it might be on my list.
Oh,
later.
It might be later. Okay, no, but I mean it if it's like the most Heat adjacent pick I could make. And I was just like, oh, now I'm just fooling myself. So my number 5 is not Spider-Man 2. My number 5 is a movie that probably not a lot of people like, but I don't care. It's the Wachowski sisters, The Matrix Reloaded. I unabashedly love all the Matrix films. And I was on a call recently at work, and we were talking about like some of the worst movies of all time. And this was mentioned. by one of my colleagues.
Excuse me?
And I wanted to leave the Zoom. I was
Excuse me?
I know, Kevin. I was angry. And they were like, even the first one's not good. And I went, are we living in a world where I just heard that out of somebody's mouth? Yeah, they would. I'm telling you.
Okay, that person's been blue pilling too much. They're about to OD.
But I remember seeing The Matrix when I was young, and that movie is it's like a foundational piece of action. But The Matrix Reloaded to me is like one of those just like perfect sequels that you can get, because it's expanding the lore. It's a lot of what we talked about with John Wick. It's expanding the lore, expanding the ideas of what you learned from in the first film, and really putting the onus on the decisions that you make will affect everyone, not just that you love, but everyone else around you, everybody in this world. And there's so many great action set pieces. Obviously, like the beginning set piece where or one of the beginning set pieces where like where Trinity's in like a dream sequence and on a motorcycle, and then there's obviously the Agent Smith versus Neo sequence. There's the highway scene, also at the place where the Merovingian is at, where Neo has to go through all the Merovingian sort of like programs and everything, which is fantastic. Then you of course have the ending of the movie. Like it's so many great action set pieces, but I had to include this because like I think the Wachowski sisters do a great job of having emotionality drive their films and really having like this like great sense of sensitivity to their characters. And then it's also just a movie about like the power of love. You know what I mean? Where like it's all about Neo making decisions for the sake of not everyone around him, like a true Messiah would, but for the woman that he loves. And there's a lot of conflict there. And then of course Lawrence Fishburne like fights an agent on top of a moving 18-wheeler, and Carrie-Anne Moss just kicks ass. Like it's a great movie. And I don't ever understand the hate for the Matrix sequels, and also a lot of it's practical and a lot of it also is digital, but they have a great blend of both. And so the Matrix Reloaded, it's my number 5.
I think a lot of the dialogue scenes in not only Reloaded but also Revolutions, they're so overlooked.
Yeah.
And I know most people don't really vibe with the entire interaction between Neo and the architect, but I think if you really take
that
the time,
rules.
Right, if you take the time and go like line by line, like that scene rules. And I love the alternate red pill blue pill choice that Neo has to make there. It's great. Mm-hmm. It's great.
Sophia, have you seen The Matrix Reloaded?
I have. Yeah, that was I didn't love it as much as The Matrix, which I think is like a perfect film. But
Flip the desk. No, I'm just kidding.
But the issue with Reloaded for me was the dialogue and the scene and the moments with the architect and Neo. That's just, it's tough for me. It's a little bit of a mind bender, but
I'll tell you, it gets better with time. Like you really, yeah. And if you watch them all three together, like it really, like if you watch them all back to back and together, like those scenes actually really click more. And then like I still have a really big.
It is
soft
good
spot.
though. I don't think it's like the worst movie, like your coworker said. That's crazy.
No, yeah, there was a lot of it was a Friday. But Sophia, your number 4.
Yeah, so my number 4 is the movie that you penalty boxed, The Dark Knight.
Okay.
And I love The Dark Knight. I think that, so I'm hard on Christopher Nolan sometimes for his screenplays and for his exposition and the dialogue, which in this movie too, it does not have the same failings as The Dark Knight Rises. I'm not going to get into that, but
that's her number 3. That's her number 3.
Yeah, that's my number 3. Yes. But no, I think that the reason I love The Dark Knight is because of the action, because it reminds me of my favorite action movie of all time, Michael Mann's Heat.
Yeah. I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, I know Sophia will have this on a list, so I don't need to have it on mine.
Right. Well, the way that it opens is just so smart too, with all of these different characters talking about the Joker. And we haven't seen him. We don't know who he is yet. They're just like, this guy, the Joker, as they're planning this bank robbery, and just the way that the bank robbery is carried out, the school bus, when the Joker is revealed to us, it is just, I think, electric action, like crime thriller filmmaking. And I will say too, I love a crime thriller. So I think when thinking about action movies, I'm more inclined to go towards the crime thriller side of things. I also think we have a great chase scene here. Like, I think about that. I think about when we didn't talk about the pencils in John Wick.
Oh,
hell yeah.
But
hell yes.
Just like the way that scene when Heath Ledger's Joker, which is also just, I think, one of the great, maybe the great comic book movie, action movie performances ever.
Yeah. Marvel could never.
Yeah. And I feel like the action scenes and set pieces here in The Dark Knight are the strongest maybe that we see in any comic book movie. I love them, and I love how it really just elevates the genre, and the action and the characters in the action are always the core of the film, and why I think it just will get better with time. I think this movie will just age like fine wine, and it's kind of crazy that, anyone has tried to make a comic book movie since.
Well, they haven't. I put that on Letterboxd a couple months ago because like a month ago I watched The Dark Knight. Good. Very fresh of mind, and I'm like, oh, it's really weird. Nobody ever decided to like make moody comic book movies anymore. You would have thought that they would have tried to do that and change the whole landscape of cinema. But no, I agree with you, Sophia. I mean, like, The Dark Knight it's one of the 2 5-star films that I give to Christopher Nolan. I think it's a perfect
this
vehicle.
Prestige.
Yeah, it's this and The Prestige. And I think that you're absolutely right. Like, the action in it is actually like really smart, and it is very much borrowing a lot from Michael Mann, but in doing so, you bring it into this sort of comic book world, and you get to have that's where the realism lies, because it's absolute danger. You're not you're not like sending a portal in the middle of goddamn downtown or some crap like that. You're blowing up a hospital. You're driving through.
When he walks out of the hospital, oh my God.
To know that that's
costume.
To know that was improvised is insane. But then also too, you're like driving under Chicago, which is what we saw in the first film, under the Narrows. You got a helicopter falling down. You've got Batman going through a mall to get to the other side. The big set piece in this film is flipping an 18-wheeler and actually flipping an 18-wheeler and using the sound of that, because they only had one shot to do it. And it's like, that's why I'm so excited for Oppenheimer, because I can't wait for him to
the sound.
It's like the sound of that movie. Like, you can say a lot about Christopher Nolan's movies, but the passion in using practical effects and his sound work, his set pieces are epic because of the fact that there is a lot of heart behind the camera and wanting to make movies the way they used to be made. And so, The Dark Knight is like the best comic book movie. It's probably one of the best films, most influential films of our lifetime. And so, but like I totally boxed it because of exactly why I'm talking right now, because I won't shut the fuck up about it.
One last thing about The Dark Knight that I love across action movies is when a character like a Q or an Alfred is showing our protagonist all of the different weapons at his disposal.
Oh, Lucius Fox.
It's just like, it's something that is so, I don't know. I love that in these types of movies where we just get to see everything that our character is going to be able to get to use to destroy other people in the movie.
That's so good. So good. Kevin, you're number 4?
First of all, The Dark Knight, masterpiece. No notes. The entire third act fairy sequence is perfect. And to finish a perfect sequence with an extra Harvey Dent scene at the end just breaks you. I think Gary Oldman is like an underrated gem of a performance in
I was
not
trying to fight the mob.
Not just The Dark Knight, but all three movies. Gary Oldman
he's
is
really
like
good.
an underrated gem in that.
Yeah.
And if we were to be making a list of best movie endings of all time, I would have the ending of The Dark Knight like in my top 3.
Yeah, that monologue and the burning of the letter and
Fox's
faith,
that score build up and the editing,
Fox's faith restored. Yeah, all of it's great.
Perfect. But just because we're calling this action sequels, I sort of did what Ryan did and didn't really include it, or like I had it right at 6 because I want to make sure that it's there.
Yeah.
All right, my number 4 is a movie that I looked forward to, not really because I am a big fan of this franchise per se, because I haven't actually seen all of them, but I loved where this character was going, and I was curious where were they going to take him. And this was my first time seeing any movie in true IMAX, and not only did the technical prowess of the film blow me away, the story moved me, and it was pure and simple an action movie. So my number 4 is Skyfall.
All right, so he did put a Bond film in there.
And the reason why I have this here is like especially with Daniel Craig's Bond films have now come to an end. Like my favorite one of the Daniel Craig films will always be Skyfall. I think Casino Royale is neck and neck right there. But I think what makes Skyfall so special to me is the unique story that it tells. It's how it's about this guy and with a very tragic backstory, how he is connected to someone he's never met before, who sort of went through possibly a similar path, and how they're both connected with a mother character. And it makes this really interesting triangular relationship, you know? And I think for a Bond movie, for an action movie to put that kind of relationship, that character relationship and story front and center is so like unique and surprising. And then add on top of that Roger Deakins' cinematography and the editing and the sense of pace and the action. There's a midpoint sequence where Bond goes after Javier Bardem's character, and like both their trajectories all converge together at this parliament where they're both trying to get to M, who's Judi Dench is so great as M in these movies, where M gives a speech about the state of the world. It just feels so elegantly put together that I never expected to get something of that filmmaking cinematic quality out of a simple action movie. You know, like I didn't go to a Bond movie expecting this kind of stuff, you know. And then Skyfall then takes an even more interesting direction with the third act. It sort of like goes back in time. We go back to Bond's childhood. We go simple. We go back to his home, and the whole entire third act is at his childhood home, and it just feels primal and raw, but exciting and unpredictable. And every time I watch it, it just surprises me, the emotional heft of it, but also the satisfaction of it. I remember the film came out during the 50th anniversary of the James Bond franchise. And I think for a film that many blockbusters nowadays would pay homage or have these nods and winks to old traditions in the franchise, I felt like when Skyfall did it, it made sense. They sort of combine it with the going back to Bond's past and sort of embracing tradition and embracing the past. And so for me, Skyfall was a very, very special example where a lot of those homages and references and nods made sense. They were like out of respect.
Yeah.
And they didn't distract from the overall story, because at the end of it all, it is about Bond and the villain and the mother M, who connects all of this together. And it's just so unique. You can't say that about a lot of other action movies. And I think that's what makes Skyfall really, really special of an action movie and an action sequel.
Also, just it's like the most gorgeous looking Bond film of all time.
Yeah.
You see that in an IMAX, and you see Roger Deakins' work on it, and it's incredible. And I just one of the big influences on my life in loving cinema was watching Bond films when I was young, and so I'm a massive Bond fan. And the fact that like this third act of the film essentially doesn't even become a James Bond movie in the typical standpoint. It becomes essentially like a movie about someone trying to save their home and save the identity of what is left after a madman has sort of destroyed it all. And it turns into, like you're saying, Kevin, it turns almost like into a Home Alone movie. It turns into like this, just about these two people trying to save what's left. And I really love it. I think I remember I did a piece about ranking Bond films for the site, and I don't remember.
You had Skyfall number 1.
Did I have Skyfall number 1?
Yeah,
good.
You did.
But Casino Royale is extraordinary too, and they're really it's all about. This movie does a fantastic job of exploring Bond's emotional state and really dissecting the character finally. And I think that's what I love about No Time to Die too, is that its ability to tap into someone that is the most quote unquote machismo, sexist, however you want to describe a character of all time, and find that there's a lot of insecurities underneath.
Really, the Daniel Craig Bond films, like as a whole, they've done a really good job. Even the flawed Bond movies, like Quantum of Solace and Spectre, I think the whole trajectory of the Daniel Craig Bond movies, what they do really well is finding ways to keep Bond vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think Skyfall was the beginning of really introducing and hitting home the idea that Bond is outdated.
Yeah.
That the world is moving on without him. And yeah.
But yet they still need him.
But they still need him. Yeah.
But he's got to figure out his shit too.
Yeah.
So my number 4 is a movie that I think people kind of dog on this franchise because they can't distinguish between one or the other. But I know the difference, and I kind of made a joke about it earlier with some of the action, but I think that this action film is fantastic. And it's Paul Greengrass's The Bourne Ultimatum is my number 4. I love this film. I think that Greengrass and Damon, they struck lightning in a bottle twice with Supremacy and Ultimatum, and then the Renner movie with like a bunch of pills just sucks. And then like the Jason Bourne film that they tried to come back to with like an actual script like is terrible. But like this movie, it ties up everything about supremacy and identity that I love so much. But then you have these like, it's why I think the Craig films sort of pivoted to the idea of this sort of really flawed hero at the center of it, and yet his search for who he is as a entity and identity. I think also too, by the end of it, you really get to fully find out who Jason Bourne is, and there's those great scenes with Albert Finney and everything. But then also too, there's this, you have David Strathairn and Joan Allen sort of chasing him throughout this film. You have these motorcycle chases. You have the chase scene in New York, which is absolutely fantastic. You have, I know I joked earlier, but like these hand-to-hand combat sequences that are actually like pretty good. And it's not my fault that Hollywood decided to really screw it up after a movie like this. And it's because Paul Greengrass is a great director, and he understands how to make Jason Bourne essentially the most deadliest man in the world. And Damon's performances in these movies too are absolutely fantastic. I love that there's very loose sort of style to it. It also, for somebody that loves like The French Connection and a lot of films and action sequences and sort of paranoid thrillers of the 1970s, like that is the closest thing we've had to it in this sense, because you're having essentially like this global CIA black ops sort of program go under, and the only thing left is this most unstoppable force that they can't stop. And I think it's like Matt Damon's best character performance of his career is stuff like in this, and this is his best wheelhouse. But ultimately, like, they're just, if you watch the 3 Bourne films, they get better as you're watching this trilogy unfold, and you really get to what makes Ultimatum so special is that emotional catharsis. And also won editing, which is like crazy at the Oscars for a movie like this to win editing. And it so deserves it, because the editing is frenetic and wonderful, mixed with this great direction from Greengrass, who I don't think has made like a really good movie since. Like I'm not as big on Captain Phillips, and then there was that.
You didn't like News of the World?
I did not like News of the World. And then there's that Netflix.
Talk about action packed.
Well, there was that Netflix movie about like, what was it? The mass shooter or something.
July 22.
Yeah. Which I just was like, man, this is just like emotionally hollow. But like this, and then of course Jason Bourne, which is just a bad movie, but this is like really good action and really stripped down storytelling too that goes with it. So it's my number 4. Let's try to keep this going and get a little quicker also with this too. Our number 3 picks, Sophia.
My number 3, I would be shocked if it wasn't on your list, is Mission Impossible Fallout. I love this movie. I think it actually has one of the greatest chase scenes ever put to film. The motorcycle chase scene is so good. It's my favorite of the franchise as well. And I feel like when I saw this, I just remember the entire, and Tom Cruise, you know, he always, I think especially as Ethan Hunt, but he always has like a knack for falling and for heights and for extremes with heights.
What do you mean?
And
you think do you think he's a little bit of a daredevil? Yeah.
But I think this film really does take that to the next level. And it was one where I remember going to see this like opening weekend and just being so floored by it, not just by the filmmaking and by the performances and the just emotional core of the story, but how it feels as use the phrase, the Harry Styles phrase, a movie.
Like a movie.
Like, this is just like when I think of like peak blockbuster franchise filmmaking, this is the gold standard.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say about it, Ryan, unless if you don't have it on your list, that's fine. But I'll save thoughts for you.
About it later. We'll talk about it later. Kevin, you're number 3.
Just the whole sequence with the helicopter. So much sweating.
Yeah.
Kevin, you're number 3.
My number 3 is an interesting one because it is a sequel to what is widely regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. And my take is a weird one because I personally like this sequel more than
I think I know where he's going.
More than the original one. My number 3 is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade.
Kevin, that is my number 3 as well.
There you go.
My number 6.
There you go.
Left it off. Yeah.
There you go. I even as a kid watching the Indiana Jones movies for the first time, there's something about Harrison Ford and Sean Connery's chemistry in The Last Crusade that just puts a big smile on my face. It is the one that I rewatched the most times. Like there's something so satisfying about all the set pieces in this movie, from the scene with Harrison Ford and Sean Connery tied to a chair together with the whole mansion catching on fire, them sitting in the car together with the motorcycle chase, them being on the blimp together and the kicking the Nazi out because he didn't have a ticket, you know. And then there's Harrison Ford accidentally having his book getting signed by Adolf Hitler.
Yeah,
there's the entire tank sequence. And then the entire Holy Grail trials at the end, they're just so fun and creative and imaginative. And this is like back when like Spielberg was at his absolute best with blockbuster filmmaking. But it doesn't lose ever the heart of this father-son storyline. And honestly, I rewatched The Last Crusade after I saw The Fabelmans 2 times, and it hits different. Yeah. It hits very, very different when Sean Connery tells him, Indy, let it go.
Yeah. Indiana.
Wow.
You know, I mean, like the thing about it is also you have that opening set piece with River Phoenix as Indiana Jones 2, and then it juxtaposes to the boat sequence at the beginning. But yeah, I mean, like I say that my favorite Steven Spielberg film and the best Steven Spielberg film is Raiders of the Lost Ark. But honestly, as much as I love that film, I know this sounds weird to say, but like the one I enjoy watching the most on a rewatch is The Last Crusade. Of all the sequels, it is the best one. It's the one that's the closest because they went to Temple of Doom. They went a little dark. It didn't work for everyone. You know what I mean? But they kind of went back to the formula here, you know, Nazis and him searching for a religious artifact and something like that. But what elevates this is that father-son connection that you mentioned, Kevin, and Sean Connery's performance
So
is
good.
as it's incredible, and his chemistry with Harrison Ford is insane. And yeah, it's one of those like last films that I remember telling people about, where like where Spielberg had that magic, and I miss that magic because even like like I don't hate Kingdom of the Crystal Skull like a lot of people do, but it's still missing a component of the magic that a movie like this has.
Yeah.
Like that movie's like dumb fun, and it's kind of like in the vein of like Temple of Doom, where it's like just turn your brain off, you'll be all right. You know
Just
what I
like
mean?
fun nostalgia.
Yeah, like, and
Right.
it's he wanted to do shit with aliens, like get over it. But like him and Lucas had like this longing to do like aliens and Indiana Jones, like get over it. Like the like when people get like really hung up on like on the aliens and the monkeys and the ants and all the crap in that movie, I think of like, oh, so you mean like the Holy Grail, which actually exists, or like the Nazis' faces melting off to some like weird ghost, or like Indy's heart getting pulled out, like all those realistic things that can happen in real life. Like it's so anyway, it's so stupid. But no, I love this film too, and then also it has like that great the great, we named the dog Indiana, and but then also like them riding off into the sunset at the end of the film. But then also too before that, it's when Indy goes off the cliff, and you have Sean Connery going like, like I didn't get to, basically like I didn't get to really tell him I loved him, and then like he comes back and he goes like, I thought I lost you, boy.
Yeah.
And it just rips your heart out. It's such effective emotional storytelling in a blockbuster. And so yeah, it's
also so delightful that we all love Harrison Ford for being the grumpy man that he is.
Yeah.
But there's something so delightful about watching Harrison Ford be in such a bad mood consistently throughout Last Crusade, and yet because he's sharing the screen with Sean Connery, his grumpiness is that of more like a kid being, so like whenever Harrison
like,
Ford
God,
is like,
Dad,
right, what I mean? Every time Harrison Ford is like, Dad, it's like, oh, there's the child again, there's the 10-year-old again.
Can't believe you're taking me to soccer practice today.
I said, stop calling me that, Dad, as he guns down Nazis.
Yeah. That's our number threes. Sophia, your number two?
My number two, which I feel like could sort of use the same lead-in intro that Kevin, you used just now. So this is the sequel to one of my favorite movies of all time, and it is totally different from the first one in every way. My number two is James Cameron's Aliens. I love this movie so much, and I went into it thinking I might not. I was really resistant to it for a long time because Alien, like I said, one of my favorite movies. I think it is a perfect like sci-fi horror film. The slow burn is what makes it special. And thinking about how at the time when Alien came out, no one had really seen anything like that before. So my dad, he's also a big fan of Alien and Aliens, told me like, you need to give Aliens a chance. You just can't view it like Alien. You have to think of it as a different type of movie because it is just nonstop action from the start. And James Cameron, talk about issues with scripts, but he is one of my favorite action directors because I cannot help but cry when I watch his action movies a lot of times. Like they're so emotional, and where he places them in the film and how he thinks about the characters and how they're interacting with the action set pieces, I feel like is really important. And this made Ripley an action hero. And how many like women do we have like that in action films who are like the central action hero, and just seeing her go toe to toe with like, it's not just like in the first one where you're like, okay, where is the xenomorph? Like where is everything happening? Like it's very scaled back in that way. This one, it's just like he just adds more. And sometimes more is more, and that doesn't pay off. But here, I think it really does. And it's my favorite James Cameron movie too. I love it.
Kevin, Kevin, do you have this on your list?
Aliens is also my number 2.
Oh,
Well, guess what? Guess what? Aliens
is it your number 2?
is also my number 2.
Oh my God.
The groupthink here is incredible. And also, just want to point out, yeah, I have a James Cameron film in my top 5. Just want to
I
put
wondered
that
if
out
you
there.
would do this or T2. Like, I didn't know where. Like,
Listen,
what
I
we
love
were thinking.
T2,
Yeah.
but the thing about this movie, it is exactly what you said. It's like Alien is a masterpiece. Like that movie
Yeah.
is one of the greatest sci-fi films, greatest horror films, whatever you want to call it. It's just one of the great films of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And the worst thing is like when I did the rewatch of like, because a couple of years ago at In Session Film we did a Fincher series, and I watched Alien, Aliens, and Alien 3 all together, and that was the worst mistake you can make, because if you watch Alien and then you watch Aliens, they're two totally different things, and you're gonna probably hate Aliens because of the fact that it's going for a totally different direction and the mythology and everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's why like Alien 3 is more like in the sort of mood and temperature of an alien. You know what I mean? But when I did the Cameron rewatch last year and just watch Aliens by itself, I know this sounds weird, but it plays so much better just by itself as a movie, even though you have, knowledge of that other film that goes into it. And it's because of the fact that like Cameron's a big softy. He is a big softy. And like the guy is like adds this mother-daughter connection to it that is then also mixed in with this over the top, militarization sort of style of action, but it's also a damnation on that style of action cinema, of like the Stallone and Schwarzenegger films that like, which is funny because like he then made a bunch of Schwarzenegger films, but yeah, and it's got these giant set pieces using practical effects. Shame that it doesn't have a lot of water in it, but that's okay. But it's like the most like non-wet film that he's had. But because Big Jim loves the sea. He's a water element kind of guy. But yeah, no, it's great. Sigourney Weaver's fantastic. An ending too that you're just kind of like on your edge of your seat, and it builds its own kind of tension inside a world that already is known for tension, and yet makes it a lot of fun. And the score too has like this great buildup in the action sequences, and by the end when she like punches it and that alien floats into space, you are like fists in the air, America kind of rules kind of sort of thing. You know what I mean? It's like you're like Rocky on the steps. It like really, really works. And James Cameron is the best director of action movies, period, of all time. And that's what's so great about The Way of Water, is taking elements of this and elements of T2 and elements of Titanic and all the films that he's made, and being able to contextualize that and build that giant third act set piece that is incredible. But this is like the old cliche of like, you just put a dollar sign on the S, and it's like yes, you can do that when you also are smart enough and a visionary enough to be able to come up with ideas and set pieces to really make you stand alongside the original, which is kind of nuts. So
I love the Queen.
Oh, it's just so it's so perfect. Like I have seen Aliens so many times, so many times, and it just blows my mind how brilliantly James Cameron handles suspense through action. Like I always like, I can feel my heartbeat like rising up, like when the aliens cut the power, and they're like, how many meters away are they? And they're like, wait, that's way too close. They should be in the room already. Oh my God, are they above us? Yeah. And then the entire third act where Ripley makes the decision to, by herself, go back and save the girl. It's like, yes, but then there's also like, oh my God, is she gonna get lost? She's by herself. We have no idea if there's an alien that's going to come out at any corner. She saves the girl and we're like, get out, get out, get out. And instead she runs further in, and like James Cameron knows how to just suddenly use silence to just show us she's in a room full of eggs. And this is how he introduces the queen. It's just perfect direction. And just when you think it's over, it's actually really funny. He uses certain techniques from the original Alien as well. Like, oh, you thought that when Ripley got onto that escape ship that the movie's over? Nope, the alien stole away. And James Cameron does the same thing here. Oh, you thought that they got away from the queen? Nope, the queen stole away. I'm giving you one final fight. And it's a callback to that lift thing that Ripley operates in the beginning of the film. And it's just like, brilliant. 10 out of 10 no notes action filmmaking at its finest.
Yeah. All right. Number one picks. Sophia, what's your number one?
So I was not strong enough to leave this off my list to make room for something else. I have to go with the movie that I think is the greatest action sequel of all time. And that's Mad Max Fury Road.
Oh.
Yeah, you kind of have to do it. Yeah.
There's nothing like it. I mean, at least one of us has to do it, I think.
Yeah.
And
that's fine.
Yeah.
I just remember when I first saw this being amazed by what I was watching. It's almost like, and I've used this phrase to describe other films that I really love, but it's like staring into the sun. You are just like,
I mean, that's not that far off, because when I first saw it, I told people this is a movie that melts your face off. So staring it into the sun, not that far off.
I mean, like, Sophia, I saw this movie, and then for the rest of the year, and then into parts of the next year, I kept saying, yeah, that movie was good, but it's not Mad Max Fury Road. and it took until seeing Moonlight the next year for me to be like, okay, that's better than Mad Max Fury. Yeah, there's some cinema can get better than that. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those, like, where were you when you saw this movie kind of moment, right?
Yeah, it's something too. Like, there's something about, I love movies where there's a mythology behind the making of them. When you think about, like, how did this even happen?
Yeah,
like, how did this come to fruition? All of the odds were like stacked against Miller here, and it's like The Godfather. It's like, how does this happen? And it, no one even expected it. Yes, that book that you're holding up, The Blood, Sweat, and Chrome by Kyle Buchanan. Read that book. It's excellent. But
read that book. See that interview up on AwardsWatch by yours truly.
Yes. But it's something that I just, when something like that happens, when you don't think something is going to, let alone like get made or be good, but then is the best thing in years, that's incredible. And it has, I think the interesting thing here is it's an action movie, but it also has like sci-fi elements to it, spaghetti westerns, the car chases, just the way that it uses the desert, the shot compositions, all of it. I mean, what can I say about Mad Max Fury Road that hasn't been said before? Charlize, again, that's another thing, right? Like, thinking about centering like women in action films, like, she is such a strong character. She should have been nominated for an Oscar for Furiosa, of course.
Tom Hardy should have been nominated for that over The Revenant. Like,
oh my god, yeah. Nicholas Hoult in this movie.
Yeah. Not only is the film like centered towards women, I love how the character of Max is written in a way in that you can tell that Max himself knows that he's the supporting character in this story.
Yeah.
And it's just really, really cool. And I always talk about simplicity is such a secret weapon to movies. And I love how this entire movie on a plot level is just a car chase and they do a U-turn. And yet thematically, it is like the most empowering thing you can have. It's a story about how these women thinking that the solution was to run away from their authoritative, tyrannical rulers, only to realize, no, they got to take it over and take back that power. It's like, so for a plot so simple, there's actually such a great deep thematic message. And as the movie goes on, you're more and more emotionally invested. And each action set piece just one-ups the other. I remember seeing the trailer for the first time and being blown away, but also being partially disappointed because I thought the sandstorm was going to be the third act. And so when I saw the movie opening weekend at the Alamo Drafthouse and realized the sandstorm is actually like the opening, I was like, wait a second. Wait, how are they going to top this? Oh, they do.
Oh, they do.
Oh, they do.
I also just think
didn't know.
it's also, I feel like as far as spectacles go, it's not a spectacle that's hollow in any way. Like it's so deep. And again, just the text. I mean, it won so many Oscars and it deserved all of them. But I think what always will stand out to me and what is a make or break thing for an action movie is the editing. Yeah. This is one of the great achievements in editing I think that I've maybe ever seen.
Honestly, it should have won more. It should have also won cinematography. I mean, as much as I love
and
Lubezki's, yeah, of course. As much as I love Emmanuel Lubezki's work in The Revenant, that is a very, very beautiful film. I think the cinematography is also so crucial in Mad Max Fury Road. They talked about it a lot, how they had to center a lot of shots.
Yeah,
because there's so many cuts. You can't afford to let the audience lose track of what you're looking at in each shot, which means there's a lot of thought that you got to put into the close-ups and the wides, and any shot where the camera has to sweep a lot, you can't ever like befuddle the audience and like now I'm suddenly lost in the geography of what's going on. That's so important. And I've always felt like that movie, it's editing and cinematography, those two gotta go hand in hand.
I mean, Sophia has 2 films on her list that I think are masterpieces in The Dark Knight and this, but also too, I know we're an awards podcast, but they also changed, I think, a lot of the trajectory of what gets nominated at the Oscars. I think The Dark Knight is how we got to the expanded lineup. And I think a movie like Mad Max Fury Road is definitely one of the catalysts in order to have the run of films that we've had nominated and win. I mean, I think of a movie like last year and Everything Everywhere All at Once or The Shape of Water winning Best Picture. Those movies don't win if the Academy doesn't start nominating a movie like Mad Max Fury Road, movie with the Doof Warrior playing a frickin' flaming guitar looking like a sex object up there on top of a giant automobile with an amplifier. The Morton Joe characters, the character designs, the costumes, everything. And also this movie, because of being able to talk to Kyle Buchanan and seeing the film since, it was in reading that book, which is a fantastic novel, of this chronological history of just one of the another prime examples of when we talk about like The Godfather and how difficult it was to make a movie like that. This movie was so difficult, the people behind it, a lot of them do not want to talk to each other ever again.
Yeah.
And it's
all worth it.
And it becomes it becomes kind of worth it because they did not know that they had a secret masterpiece on their hands. They did not know that this was going to hit the zeitgeist in a way that I believe has revolutionized a lot of action films, and is how I think it's also like it didn't make like a ton of money, but it's cemented itself in the culture as being one of the great films of the last decade. It was my number 2 of the decade. You know what I mean? It was that, and Moonlight was my number 1. It was like, oh, it's these 2 movies. It's not even close. What else you got, decade? You know, kind of thing.
Right.
And so
you might as well make a top 10 of the decade. That's not besides Moonlight.
Yeah,
and,
you could
Mad Max
you
Fury
could
Road.
penalize those other 2 films like I penalized Mad Max today, but it's not it's a great pick, Sophia. Like, it's just me being stubborn and not picking it, honestly. But
no, I know. I just knew one of us had to, because it's it's the unequivocal.
It's that movie.
Answer.
It's that movie.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, what's your number 1?
Well, I gotta go with the predictable choice, because in this case, the movie really is that good. It really is one of my all-time favorite movies. I am sticking with Big Jim. My number 1 is T2, Judgment Day.
Dun, dun,
Yeah.
dun, dun, dun.
The thing with James Cameron and sequels is he nails the two ways to make a good sequel. You can either make something completely different, which is Aliens, or you improve everything about the first film and expand everything about the first film, which is T2. I feel like T2, it has all the thematic depth and emotional resonance that the original Terminator just did not have. And even though the original Terminator will always be a milestone of the genre and of blockbuster filmmaking at the time, I find Judgment Day to be just such a drastic leap beyond that. It's so much more complicated and sophisticated. There are way more characters. It's a much, much bigger movie than the first one. And the visual effects work, it holds up. The action set pieces, they're so different. There are fist fights, there are shootouts, there are chases. Meanwhile, there's this incredibly emotional story about surrogate fathers. And like you said it, Ryan, about Big Jim being a softie, there is something very emotional and vulnerable that every time I watch Judgment Day, I get really emotional by the end when Arnold has to leave us, and so many action movies have come by in any sort of genre, fantasy action, sci-fi action. I always come back to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And I think for sci-fi movies that tend to have give cautionary messages about our future and human society and where we're possibly going, I find Terminator 2 Judgment Day to be a movie that ages phenomenally well. I think it remains culturally relevant. You can still talk about its messages to this day. And just so many action movies that come out today, I have to hold it up against it. Is it at that level? Is it at that tier? It's the gold standard for me. And I know it's predictable. You look up all the lists of best sequels ever made, best action sequels ever made. You see Terminator 2, you see Aliens on there. But this is a case in my book where both of them are really, really that good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No.
I totally agree.
It's in the 10 to 15 range for me, which is great. All right. My number one. Sophia hinted at it earlier. Get the goddamn bongos out. Let's go. Get the bongos out. It's Mission Impossible Fallout. I mean, a movie that if I wasn't gonna put Mad Max Fury Road as my number one, was the other film I would put as my number one. I think that this movie ranks right up there with Mad Max Fury Road, as being one of the action spectacles that we will talk about for decades to come. It is building up of everything that I love about this franchise and taking it then to the next level. Christopher McQuade did a fantastic job with Road Nation, and it's the only time in the franchise, and now it seems like he dominates the franchise because he owns it with Cruise, where he essentially returns, and the movie looks vastly different in the cinematography, in the way that the characters interact, in the set pieces, and everything feels elevated, but it's elevated in such a way that it's the darkest, I think, film of the franchise so far. It's the movie that fundamentally asks the questions to Ethan about literally what Sean Harris's character says, which is instead, I wonder if you ever did think of a time where you didn't choose to pick a mission to try to save the world. I wonder how that affected you. I wonder if what I can do is take Ethan even to the next level, make it a paranoid thriller, because this whole time with Henry Cavill's persona being thrown right into this, you have the question of do you think that Ethan Hunt has finally gone off the edge, or is he still a step ahead of everyone? You have this great chemistry that is established now with Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames coming back into the fold. And then also too, you have Rebecca fucking Ferguson, who is amazing in this movie. You have Angela Bassett doing the thing for a little bit in this movie. You got Alec Baldwin, still really good as a recurring, coming over and being their director from the past film. And honestly, like there's so many set pieces that Kevin mentioned. The helicopter scene, the chase sequence is great. Obviously the bathroom sequence, which is like you talked about, Sophia, which is straight out of Chaplin, straight out of Buster Keaton. The way we got the meme of Henry Cavill like loading up. Yeah, like he's like lock and loading those arms of his. You have I just think the sequences with Rebecca Ferguson, but then what makes this movie even so much more special than the last one, and Ghost Protocol, is adding in Ving Rhames and his connection with Ethan Hunt, having Luther's connection, talking about that, and talking about Julia, who's Michelle Monaghan's character, tapping into that stuff, which is, then you hear hints of the score from 3 in there. Michael Giacchino's work in there. You see that everything is built up to these giant moments of impact for Ethan at this, and it just really is like the reckoning, the dead reckoning.
Part one.
and so now we get to kind of, by the end of this film, have it reset, and now we're going to get this epic conclusion that comes. Plus, the movie is just so fucking rewatchable. I mean, it is. I was when I was in my hospital stint last year, it was on, and I watched it. And then it was on again the next day, and I watched it again because it's like so good. I think I've seen this movie at least like a couple of dozen times. It's got it's like one of those just rewatchable movies I can put on, and I'm still like on the adrenaline high of it. And it feels like at times too, the story's kind of making it up as it goes, but that's kind of like the style in which the IMF has kind of always been, where we're just gonna make it up as we go, and we're gonna kind of get through this and
They gotta improvise because the plan always goes wrong. It always goes south, so they gotta improvise.
And I'm sorry to the Maverick fans out there, but I'm sorry, but Cruise is phenomenal in this movie, and this is more of like in line of the performances that I know Tom Cruise in an action film can do, where there's a lot of conflict, emotional conflict. And I think you don't get Maverick if you don't have this movie, if you don't have what he's been doing in the past 3 to 4 movies in the Mission Impossible franchises, which is laying a foundation for something to become more and more epic. And that's why like John Wick works, and that's why Ethan Hunt works so well in the Mission Impossible films, is the fact that his sense of having to save the world and his sense of duty is the thing that costs him the most. His loyalty is the thing that is his downfall. It's also the best strength about him too. And so I just think that this movie is absolutely fantastic. It's one of those, just like, for so many years, I've been like fighting against, I guess, myself, the idea of like, I love Widows, and I love If Beale Street Could Talk, and I love, Leave No Trace, and all these films from 2018. But then I just sat down recently. I said, what are you fooling yourself for? This is your favorite film from that movie. You watched this enough. Like, you can have that in there. And it's why Dead Reckoning Part 1 and Part 2 are so anticipated for myself. And I think for a lot of people, is because of the fact of this movie left us at a place where you could call the franchise done, but the ideas and all the news and everything that they've been releasing about even connecting it further back from the previous 3 entries, but even connecting it to the first film and kind of wrapping this all the way up. Like, McQuade is building to something. And with this film, it's so big that you're like, where the hell are they going next? And I can't wait for it. But yeah, I love this movie. And then those bongos make me bonkers every time I hear those bongos played in the score. It's so great.
And you didn't even talk about you didn't even talk about the entire scene where Tom Cruise is chasing Henry Cavill, like his running sequence, or you didn't even talk about the Halo jump
where he like blows out his leg in real life. Like, they had to shut down production of the movie because he was and he kept running through the camera to get the shot, and they used that in the film. Yes, the Halo jump, which is like, something I'll never do in my life. And the fact that they like had to film that like 6 or 7 times. Like, I have been watching way too many behind the scenes already for Dead Reckoning Part 1.
Oh god.
And
you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
No, I'm setting myself up for a fucking hell of a good time. And so like every time he like takes the motorcycle and has been doing this new stunt, I think to myself, he did that how many times? And he says he did it 9 times. And I was like, okay, Ferris Bueller, calm down. But at the same token, though, it's the level of dedication in front and behind the camera. It's why I think that, honestly, it's why I think Maverick works so much is because of McQuade coming in and doing rewrites. He has tapped into doing something with Cruise that is going to go down as one of like the best partnerships for the two of them to ever happen, and might be one of the best things that's happened for us in modern blockbusters.
And with the marketing of Dead Reckoning, as you said, I could not express how happy and gleeful I was when they dropped that poster. It's like,
oh my god,
of
like the motorcycle and he's above it.
They get it.
Oh, they know.
they know.
They know that if that wheel hit him in the face, he's dead. And like, you know, and
no need to release any other poster. I'll take this one.
But like at a certain point with these films, we're at the point where I don't feel this with John Wick. I don't feel this even a little bit with Mad Max. Even though they did all want to kill each other. I think Tom Cruise just wants to die. And I think he's going to make a film, and we're going to be, and like when Ethan Hunt, if he does die in Dead Reckoning Part 1 or 2, if he does die, I think Tom Cruise is legally dead. I think he'd be legally dead. And I think what a way to save
he's
cinema.
Immortal though, actually.
That's fair too. Well, that's, you know, that's the secret sauce in the Scientology stuff. But anyway, they're great movies. We mentioned a lot of great movies. Just go out there and watch some of these movies. They're absolutely fantastic. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up this week's show. It's been a long show. We've talked about a lot of action movies, so you should have a lot of recommendations, and you should also go see John Wick. So Sophia, can you tell everybody where they can find you and all your work on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Sophia_Sim, where I will be tweeting about a lot of new 2023 releases. And you can also find my podcast, which is called Oscar Wilde. We release episodes every Friday. Our season 4 premiere is coming soon, where we will be talking about Casablanca, one of the great films of all time.
One of my favorite films.
Yeah. Yes. And you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Oscar Wilde Pod. And you can find reviews and interviews by me at AwardsWatch.
Give her a follow. She's the best. Kevin?
You can find all of my work on AwardsWatch, Film Inquiry, and That Shelf. And I'm on Twitter at Clee_film_review.
Go follow Kevin. He's the best too. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade77. You can find my work, all my South by coverage. Kevin's South by coverage is on the website too. At awardswatch.com. I've also got stuff at the playlist and Session Film, a bunch of other places. Next week, we'll be back. We're going to be doing something a little bit different. I know that there's, some movies coming out. Maybe, I don't care. We're going to be doing a retrospective review of a film that's turning 25 years old. We're going to be talking about The Big Lebowski. And in for that top 5, we're going to be talking about our top 5 Coen brother movies. Ooh. So to kind of partner that with. So
tempting.
It's very tempting for everyone to keep listening to the show while we're in the off season, because we got a lot of fun things that'll be coming up. A lot more top 5s. We'll be doing a retrospective in a couple of weeks over the 2003 Oscars, because that's 20 years now. Just a bunch of different fall stuff. And of course, coming up at the end of April will be the summer movie draft. So I hope you all are ready for that and for all of us to tear apart. Also, a week before that, we will finally do those fall and summer movie draft reviews. So we're going to have fun doing those. So with that, thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you all next time.